All right. So this is the Habitat Public Issue Triage for the week of August the 22nd. So thanks everybody who's here, whoever's watching this later. We've gotten our triaged issues back down pretty low, so I think our plan for the day might be to see if we can't go through, finish triaging the ones we have here, and then start taking a look at issues on the core plans repo. Ideally, we should be splitting our time between these two things, and we've been kind of trying to get one thing under control. After ChefConf, we had a lot of new issues. So just now that we're kind of getting caught up, it'll be good to get back into sifting and sorting those and figuring out what's what over in that repository. So one second. All right, so we're going to start today with issue number 2950. This is an issue with the Habitat client 29.1. Give everybody a second. It looks like generally we're getting a certificate verify failed. But no repro steps.
Mm-hmm.
So, and no information about whether or not this is actually inside the studio or outside the studio. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to pull this issue up. And I'll leave a comment that just asks for more information, and then we can wait until next week. If we don't see a response by then, what we'll do is we'll close this issue out. So give me just 1 second to type up a quick comment here. And Fletcher, thanks for joining. We're looking at 2950.
2950, yeah.
And I'm about to just leave a quick comment asking for some more information.
How you doing, Fletcher?
Not too bad. Not too bad. I think we may have found the source of a couple bugs this morning
Cool.
on one of them. So,
Ian, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry,
Oh,
I'm muting myself just because I thought the keyboard clicky-clacky might be.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, the screen wasn't moving either, so I was like, huh? Okay, cool.
it's funny. That's something I always find kind of it's like a nice babbling brook. Like it's pleasant.
Yeah, I love it,
but yeah, I'm a programmer and a drummer, so I mean, this maybe I have to like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, depends on who it is. If it's me or Jamie, it's pretty darn loud.
I know. I was actually in awe. I think was that last month? I think you were sitting behind. I'm like, wow, you can really go. And yeah, I was pretty impressed. I liked it.
Yeah, I worked for a year after college. This was in 2007 too, at a job where I did have to use an actual typewriter, and I've never lost that muscle memory.
Yeah,
it was an electronic one. It wasn't one of the ones where the letters fly, but it was enough that you had to hit the keys firmly.
Wow.
I'm actually going to close this out, I think. I'm going to leave a note that says we need some more information as far as steps towards repro and some contextual information with regards to whether this is in a studio, etc. But I am going to close it out and ask that once that information be added, it get reopened. But just for cleanliness sake, I'm going to close it because we haven't seen a response in 6 days. So
that should be all right.
Sounds good to me.
Sweet. All right, let's go ahead and move on to 2947. And this is an issue that I can speak to because I wrote this. So effectively, it's an issue with partially to do with the way that we're parsing JSON right now, which is just with the Siri crate, Siri JSON crate, I think, this issue specifically comes up in the context of Docker Compose, because Docker Compose, when it assigns environment variables, what it's actually going to do is it's going to put double quotes around the outside of these things. There's just an extra layer of abstraction there. And so I actually was talking with SR about this effectively, like when you do this on a command line, the way that you get around this and you get it to work is by putting single ticks around the outside. But in the context of Docker Compose, it does not. So what you end up having to do is actually put double quotes around that value, which isn't the best, because what that's doing is then telling the environment variable this is a string. So if we have a config options that are expecting to be an integer, and you're passing in a string, you're going to get some configuration problems. So, oh, look at that. That is just lovely. I didn't know you could do that in a Git comment. That's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. What is the trick to that?
I don't know. I've never seen it before.
So very briefly, funny thing is, if you're using something like waffle.io, things that are in little drop downs like that won't show up. So someone responded to a comment of mine on an issue once with just hello Nell, and then put the rest of it in a drop down, but it just showed up in waffle as hello Nell, which sounded like Silence of the Lambs and creeped me out, frankly. But once I went to the actual thing, I saw, no, there's more than that.
Wow. I would probably just write hello back ? And they'd be like, I gave you more. Yeah. Oh, string quoting. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, so this, I don't know if this is something that we can actually fix, or it may be, I haven't checked. We may want to see if there's an open issue in the Siri JSON crate for this, because the thing that I wrote for this, as far as deserializing the values, is 100% reliant on functions or out of that Siri JSON. So I'm wondering if there's just something that we just don't know, or what. Yeah. So here you go. You can see he's escaping those values inside of his quotes. Well, actually, that seems wrong too.
So the other difference in this case, that's interactively in a studio. So running bash, and it's bash's job to remove the outside double quotes before, and then it'll treat like the result of that is like your argument, whatever it is, or like the value to that thing. So so I think that bash would strip out your outer double quotes and then just use the inner ones. Whereas Docker Compose, I think, is Python, which would be either shelling out or doing a direct system call. So yeah, the long and short of it is, who knows what variables or who knows what quotes are going to get passed through and which ones are going to get stripped. It's a little, yeah, we're basically we're black box testing is what it feels like a bit right now.
Yeah. Well, so, and yeah, for now, I think, like, there are workarounds, right? It's not going to work for every context, but we at least have some kind of workaround. I think that this is something we should, if our plan is to continue to support that API, I don't even know that it will continue to take the same shape as this initial implementation, but like we probably want to at some point take a look at this. Not that that means that we'll have any straightforward way of fixing it on the immediate. So
yeah, the downside is it is still super valuable for us to be able to understand and parse an integer versus a string that happens to have digits in it, because our underlying, like our TOML, has the same ability to understand type, and that will sometimes get passed down into the code to be understood. So I'm thinking like a port number.
Yeah,
for,
exactly.
that you do an export, that is for sure an integer. In fact, we're making sure of that at build time, that the packages are exporting like a numerical value, not a string.
Right.
So it would be really great, to still have like a bare integer being parsable that way.
Yeah, and I mean I know the TOML crate is from this same kind of family of code there, right? Like it's actually that TOML crate used to be part of that SIRD TOML or something. I can't remember what the actual history of it is. I'm pulling things out of thin air right now, but I do recall that when I was looking through to figure out how to do the JSON parsing, that looking at these things, that they were similarly maintained. So I would guess there might be a way. This probably just is going to require just a little bit of research to figure out how to resolve it, even if it is like a couple of phases needing to deserialize in a couple of phases or something of that nature. So what I'm actually going to do is, this is a supervisor. I think this could be considered a bug.
Yeah, I mean, I that's the way I would sort of treat it.
I think it would be relatively, well, I'm going to mark it as less easy right now, if only because there's going to be some research involved in it. And I don't want to say, yeah, it's super easy, and then it turn out to be multiple PRs upstream to get things working, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to affect everybody. And for now, what I'm going to do is put this into the help wanted column. But I am going to research this quickly. But yeah, if anybody else feels like picking it up, or any community members feel like picking it up, I don't imagine it'll be too complicated. And what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to add a link to where this code is into the comment real quick. So give me just a second. And for anybody that's following along, this code is in under components soup, I believe. Manager service config is where all of this is. And where did my code go? Oh, perhaps that I'm looking. Oh, no, here it is. Yep. This is the function. So I'll go ahead and put this in as a comment. Give me 1 second. I'm going to mute myself again.
Might need to bring along some elevator for music for next time.
It's not a bad idea. All right. So that's good. I went ahead and added a link. You can go ahead and check that out if you feel like it. Yeah, I think this is great. I think that this needs to actually be reopened on the core plans
Agreed.
repo.
It'd be a little easier.
Yeah. Just for the sake of cleanliness, I'm trying to be really diligent about things that we leave open and things that we close. So I'm going to actually close this with a comment, and I'll ask Chris to reopen on the core plans repo.
Sure.
I'll make sure to let him know that I totally agree with this.
Cool.
So 1 second. All right, moving right along. 2790. Indeed. So this needs to get, so we had some changes in the way that we're handling our backlog, in that we're trying to keep the backlog more focused on current work. I don't know that it's going to continue to operate that way. We may need to be changing the way that we operate with milestones. I was actually talking to Nell about this right before the broadcast started. Right now, what we've been doing is using milestones like buckets for sifting and sorting our issues, so we know what's where, and then we are planning to be going back through those buckets on a regular cadence so that we know what can get sifted and resorted. But we recently decided to cut our backlog items down to be more focused on what the issues that people are currently working. And this is one of the issues that got unsorted, if you will. So going forward, I'm hoping this week to finish drafting what the new process is going to look like. It may be that we start using milestones and boards that are specific to milestones, or it may be that we start using separate buckets or putting things in separate buckets. For now, this issue, I think, is actually going to end up going into our accepted minor milestone. And we will come back to it when we iterate over that milestone, most likely after our next major, I'll call it a major release. It's not technically a major release, but after the release date we're shooting for on October the 1st. So
kind of like after the next chapter.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think like basically what it actually is like after the next real milestone. So yes. All right. So for now, I've gone ahead and sorted that way. We can go ahead and move along. There's going to be a couple of those in here, I believe. Yep. 26. Oh, sorry. Nope. 2977.
I have context for this. And,
yeah. Yep, I have context for it too. So yeah, Jamie. So this is the issue that I was seeing last week that I was telling you. Well, I think that this is a side effect of the issue I was seeing last week, and it's this specifically.
That's
it's
right.
Not, yeah. So, and I've just finished doing some testing today that shows that the version of the Postgres plan that got released at chef.conf or the right before chef.conf is what broke Postgres. Any version after that is not functioning. And so what we're going to need to do is basically go back to that PR and see what all changed. My understanding was it was kind of a significant change, and we'll kind of have to go piece by piece to see what exactly it is that is causing this behavior.
Well,
that doesn't mean that it's not a launcher.
So Jamie's comment there is effectively what it is. There's a post run hook in Postgres, which that gets handled right now in the main thread of execution in the supervisor. And that post run hook right now is calling a hab, shelling out to a hab command, which may not be terminating. So effectively, the supervisor is going through, it's like, handling census changes and like restarting things, and then gets to this and then waits, doesn't finish, which means every update, elections, like all the census stuff that's being populated on the thread doesn't actually get updated. So basically it's like hitting the pause button on the entire supervisor.
So I thought that as well until I tested the plan without the post run hook.
Okay.
And it does the exact same behavior. The only difference is that so when we fork those processes, we actually start a new child process for each hook. The post run hook does definitely sit out there. But when you rebuild this plan without the post run hook and start it, it has the exact same behavior, just that the post run hook isn't hanging there. So I don't think that's actually what's going on. I don't know what is going on past that. I just know that the two things I've tested so far are removing that post run hook and rebuilding and testing that way, and then rebuilding from, starting from a previous version. And the only thing that actually worked was that previous version. I haven't actually finished tracing that down. I'm planning to do that tomorrow.
Okay.
For now, I will update some comments on both of these issues, but either way, Jamie is right. These definitely are specific to that Postgres failure, whatever it is. I don't. Yeah, it's a super weird one though. It's a pretty bizarre behavior.
The only reason is we've seen this from time to time. Basically, when you get into a weird state where the main loop of the supervisor doesn't run, then that's where it appears like, oh, leader election's not happening. The binding reconfigure hooks aren't firing. Things aren't rendering, and that's because basically that main loop is just on pause.
Yeah, so it may not be the post run hook that's causing the problem. It may be the run hook, because I think that actually the run hook itself also calls hab commands that may not be starting correctly.
Well, and it gets weird because I think at least in that post run, it tries to load another service back into the supervisor, which also affects the main loop. And so if you did something like in a hook, say load me my core/epically massive package, at that point the supervisor is going to start to download a lot of stuff, and depending on what state it might be in or how that was invoked, that could happen in the main loop of the supervisor right now. There is some more work that we want to do to get the state machines of all the services potentially be independent threads. That's not where we're at the moment. That's still fallout from us getting this multi-service stuff. But that is one of those weird situations that made me a little. That's one of the things I wish that we would be able to kind of finish out with the work we did back in the first quarter of the year.
Some of the work that CM is doing with the composite services will likely touch some of these things. Because I mean, it 100% should. If it doesn't, then we've got the wrong shape. If only because this is a good example of a sidecar where Postgres is expecting this sidecar to be available in order for the clustering to behave appropriately. And it's something that needs to run literally alongside the Postgres process on the same instance. So, and also be able to be managed by the supervisor without writing these separate plans and hooking them all together. So the composite service stuff should touch these.
Yeah.
Okay, I've gone ahead and flagged both of those as accepted minor because I believe that we are, in fact, going to be touching both of those one way or another. 2776 is going to be the next issue. Oh yeah, so this is one that got opened up. Yep, so for now, this is going to be another one that we're just going to throw into accepted minor while I spend some time this week trying to finish redefining the way that we're going to be handling triage going forward. And for anybody that is jumping on now and watching, what I mean by that is we've changed the way we're handling our backlog, and that has had some effect on the way that we need to triage and the way that we need to keep organized. And so you can expect to see some changes in a blog post about those at some point this week or next week at the latest. All right. This is going to be another one that came out of that, issues that got deprioritized. I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to put it in accepted minor.
By the way, that's going to be a killer feature when we do that one.
Yeah, it totally will. It's super will be awesome. 2676 is the next one. Okay, so this might be possible that this needs to get closed out, actually. If the feature is there. Yeah, so it's
well, there's at least an environment variable. There's at least a pleasant workaround. I guess at some point having it be like a configuration tunable would make it slightly better.
Yeah, I guess the question is, this is for the dub. So this is for habitat.sh? No, this is the depot.
Yes.
So that should already be a configurable. If we're passing it in via environment variable, those are all habitat packages, correct?
So yeah, these are in habitat packages, but the so the link is.
Oh, I should pull that up.
Oh, this is a
yes.
build time. This is our, well, unless that fix isn't related.
It looks like this is, yeah, it's not. This is related to that. We had a conversation about this before, which was like right now, for acceptance, this is related to acceptance kind of specifically.
You click back and you're like, oh, I'm on builder, not like acceptance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So we're not, because we don't deploy. Yeah, I guess we just need to update. We need to update this. And right now, the site in acceptance is not a habitat package. What we're actually doing is we hook the master branch, or we hook whatever branch you're working on into Netlify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Netlify just spins us up a little container basically for QA on that. But right now, we don't set that environment variable. This is something we're going to want to fix.
Yeah, I think it's still opened.
Yep, it is. Yeah. I'll add it to accepted minor as well. I'm also going to update this with chore. Oh, it's already got a chore label on it. Easy, and this is probably
JavaScript.
Some what?
It might be JavaScript, like for the front end stuff where you like click to navigate back.
It might be, or it might be HTML. So I'll flag it with both. All right, cool, and great. So now we're down to 3 more, 2 of which are RFCs that have been open for a while. This one actually got reopened. We're still waiting on some information here. So I'm going to update this with a comment that asks for more information. And if we don't get anything by next week, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and close this issue again, and then offer the person who opened it, they can go in and update and reopen if they would like. So give me one moment. All right, I left a comment on that, and then we can go ahead and move along to package splits, which has also been open for a while. And Fletcher, you recently commented on this. There was some more discussion around it. You had a really a little more of a graceful way of doing this, which is effectively adding a dependency of the thing to itself, right? Do you want to talk about your GCC example?
Right. So this was, well, I don't know if you call it a pattern if we did it once, but there is this pretty common need that I found out about with so GCC typically need that as the compiler to compile things. But there are some libraries in GCC that ship with the software that are like, I can't remember, there's some like numerical helper libraries and stuff that authors of software will typically use. And what ends up happening is you don't want to really have a runtime dependency on the entire GCC compiler. So when I looked at what other Linux distros did, there's typically this like GCC libs or an equivalent kind of library. So I took the naming and the pattern from Arch Linux in this case, since we sort of have some spiritual connection with Arch Linux and sometimes the way we'd name things and approach. So the what they have in Arch Linux, and that kind of goes back to this RFC, is a way sort of from one build definition to potentially emit multiple packages. And what I had done instead with our system sort of as it stood today and as it stands now is sort of one plan yields one package. But I realized that if I was to just say ask for the package that had all the libraries in it as a build dependency, then I have it available. Then I can just copy what I need out, populate the package that I want, which is just sort of some extracted runtime libraries. The only thing really left that I had to do in this case was patch the ELF binary headers a little bit, just to say that like there's this is now the location that you need to go and look for your libraries, like in this new package, not in the old one. And that was pretty much a cheap and easy way to just get a lightweight runtime only dependency that occasionally you need, and you usually know when you need it because it doesn't end up working when you go to run it. And this was kind of a pattern that I was looking to probably try with Postgres as well. So in the context of like our scaffolding and that kind of thing, at least for Ruby, it's most of the Postgres drivers end up being, they have some native code. So they need some of those linked libraries of Postgres. And when I kind of looked at what happens on like Ubuntu and Arch, typically there's some kind of like runtime only libraries that you can install, and you usually need the development versions because you need the file headers and all that stuff, and then your PGGem will basically build. So that was kind of, that was sort of like on my mental backlog months ago to sort of look at it, but it didn't impact the ability for us to use scaffolding at the time. So this is a bit of a hack or an alternative way to kind of get what this RFC might deliver it another way. But this was another way to get sort of like, I just need a small runtime version in this one case, so I could just make it. And if you go, I think the links in this one, I think I have links back to how that GCC libs work. And it's mildly evil because we have all of our core plans in one place. We can literally source the upstream, like the GCC package, and we can make use of its own package version that we just sourced to set our own version of the GCC libs. So in that way, we never really have to rev the version of GCC libs because it's sort of dependent, but only because it's sourcing the other plan, if that makes sense.
So, and I think the pattern is a good one. The only remaining question around this for me, and like I played with this pattern as well because I also had a Postgres libs package that I built and never uploaded, which I think everybody on the team has done now. But the only remaining question is whether or not we want to put a first-class name and wrapper around that pattern, or if we feel like the experience as is good enough.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have an opinion on that or not.
It's a good question. I guess I should go and reread and think about this. So at the moment, a lot of times what my gut reaction is probably going to be super epically biased because in some cases we needed to implement just enough to actually make like this whole habitat thing like be runnable or launchable. And I guess my takeaway is like everything we have in core plans sort of exists at least as is without, it might be more awkward than an alternative, but everything was like minimally, like we could make it work. So I guess there's always my first reaction of like, oh, is this actually preventing somebody from doing something? And a lot of times the answer is either is probably no. So this idea of the composite plans, that like we need these two things running in the supervisor, that's a bit getting into the area where like we don't really have a way of doing that in a reasonable way. So that's where I'm like, I guess that's where I like tend to be like, yeah, we probably do need to allow that. And something like this, I guess what helps me is just to see more either examples of sort of what we're losing, or to see this pattern, repeated enough that like, oh, there's actually a whole swath of things that we're going to need to do in the future. Or occasionally, sometimes the A versus B. So when we remove the package source being required, when you have the plan like in your own repo, I was kind of sold once I saw the plan before and after, and you had all these like overrides, and you had to like do the fake package source, and then not seeing it afterwards, and then envisioning how much code we could delete. I'm like, I was pretty sold at that point. Yeah. The hardest part with this is to figure out right now the way the flow works, and like this goes kind of all the way from the supervisor back to the packages down to builder in the build system, is typically one plan produces one package which boots one service. And if we want to start relaxing that kind of like one-to-one assumption, it's not to say we can't. Things just get potentially a bit more complex, or we need to think a bit harder about how that flow goes. So like right now with the build system, if you had a plan that emitted multiple hearts, what would that look like? What would be the thing that we upload? Do we upload the one or the many, or how would we say that we want this version, or do we get all of them? And how would we describe the set? So yeah, there'd be some design around it.
It would be a significant change without a doubt. It would touch lots of things, and that's partially not just because the design is for one plan maps to one service, but also that one plan maps to one service and one package, and our build, the build system and the build service are both expecting that behavior, which means that we have all of these. It's bound up in literally every layer of everything that we do.
Sometimes explicit and sometimes implicit. Like, does the build fail? Yes, it does. What does that mean? This one package artifact, which maps back to this one plan, either has a failure or didn't succeed, versus 2 out of the 3 worked.
Right. Yeah.
And then how would you kind of describe that? And does that mean like the underlying plan has the problem, or was it just a transient thing on the 1 out of 3? And then what do you do with the 2 out of 3? And in the failure case, you just rerun the whole thing. And
so I'm inclined to add a comment that says, that we have identified a way to get behavior like this via the pattern you've established with GCC libs, and then to ask the same question I just asked you of the community, and say, hey, if you have feelings on whether or not you want to, whether you think there's value in a first-class wrapper for this kind of behavior, then please share them here. Otherwise, we're gonna document it and close it out.
Yeah, this could change in the future. It's hard to say like where this might go. There's also an experiment that I've shelved now for well over a year, which is even like our glibc right now. All of our packages have the header files and like additional stuff you might not need at runtime, but you do need for build time. And one of the experiments that I wanted to try is like, what would a GCC runtime only look like? And if we had one, it would be the same pattern, but like maybe there's some packages that are super critical to our footprint size, like maybe the supervisor, that maybe if we took a runtime dependency on like a smaller runtime glibc, we wouldn't have to do that for our whole package system, but maybe there'd be some times where like size is more of an issue. So you could like make an extra package to get you that file size down. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think about like we can look at Ubuntu and Arch to some degree, in that like in some of these there's always a split where your expected runtime package is not going to have all of the same libraries that a like dev package will. Mm-hmm. Or like if you look at like one of the distros that I've run for a little while is Solus, and Solus splits out a lot of those libraries into -devel packages.
Right. Yep.
And there are things developers are going to want to use that are going to be a little more lightweight or a little more focused on just being those extra headers or those development libraries. And I would assume as the project goes on that we will in fact have a need for a little more procedure around some of these plans. But where we're at came out of a need of like getting stuff done so that we could in fact have the tooling at all.
Well, and we're also making, under this was a little bit of a guess or a hypothesis that to make it as easy as possible for end users writing plans, that they don't need to have that additional burden at the start of knowing I put my glibc-devel in build deps and I put my glibc-run or just the -libs or something in my runtime dependencies. So that's in effect like what we would want. It's like, well, we need these to build against, but we need these to run against. And when we started early on, we didn't even have build dependencies. So that like a lot of that was sort of new. And it is kind of freeing sometimes to just think like, I just need that to build with and I need that to run with, and not worry too much about where header files go, at least for the moment. I'm hoping in the grand scheme of things, that's not nearly as important as getting runtime correctness. But again, that's still a bit of a guess. And that was a bit at least I think the tendencies that Adam and I had. I'm assuming Jamie was at least about on the same page like early on, or didn't care enough to like really have a strong opinion. I know when I talked to Adam, this is kind of where we landed, is let's just have the one package for the moment, so that we don't need like our users to be like extra advanced right out of the gate kind of thing.
Cool. I'm gonna finish typing up my comment real quick here, and hopefully anybody who watches this or anybody who follows along with our updates, you can come in and add an update after I issue the question. We've got some conversation happening here now, which is good, and we do in fact have that pattern, but it will be worth figuring out but I also would like to get this closed out soon or accepted one way or the other. So and it could be, you know, even if we do accept it, this could be realistically could be a accepted major, which means we're not talking implementation until right before 1.0 or until 2.0. So it could be kind of, it could be not like either way, we're talking a change like this is not going to be happening until sometime next year at the earliest, even if we were to accept it.
That's a really good point. So I tend to short circuit immediately to what is forwards and backwards compatible and like doable in a small enough time frame, and then everything else I try not to think too much about. So you're right that I tend to not really think too far beyond. Could we make this trick without impacting a whole lot of people, or is it imminently like worth it now?
Yep. So we'll see if we can get some comments on that, and if nobody cares one way or the other, then what I'm going to do is close this out. So, but we'll give it another week at the earliest. We'll see if we've gotten enough response by next week's triage, and if we have one way or the other, then we'll have an answer. If not, we'll leave it for one more week. So anybody who's following along, this is only going to be open at max for 2 more weeks before we close it down. And I'll make sure to leave that information in my comment as well. So give me just 1 second here.
By the way, I'm back. I got distracted by another community thing real quickly, but I am back with my attention on this call.
Cool.
All right. I went ahead and added a comment, more or less just everything that we just talked about. So the last issue, untriaged issue, is going to be 1952.
It was a good year, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Kind of wish we had done that from the start. It would have made things a bit easier.
Well, so I mean, I had an RFC around this like a year ago, and in fact, this needs to get updated to say RFC because it absolutely is an RFC. Because this would be a change that could break people. Not necessarily that it would, but it could. And aside from that, so there was some discussion before, and if I can find it, I'll link it into this. But do you remember that that conversation at all, Fletcher?
Well, so I know that there is currently an issue that I think a community member might be looking at that had not a shell or PowerShell script in the hooks directory. So it wasn't a binary file in this case, but I believe it was a favicon. And the supervisor super doesn't like trying to do like ASCII template
I do remember that.
interpreting. Yeah, so there is this thing that like originally the idea was like, well, you could write your run hook in Go if you wanted and just put it in there. Like, you know, as far as the supervisor is concerned, I execute this. The only difference is like we probably want to check to make sure that your file type is like an ASCII text something, and then we might try to do text interpolation. And otherwise, maybe we leave it alone.
The issue, that issue from before was actually with the config directory and then anything that gets templated, right? And anybody who's ever put anything that's a non-UTF-8 character or non-UTF-8 file into the config directory, you're going to see the supervisor blow up because it hates that. And by hates it, I mean like it's expecting to template things there, and so it's gonna take that file and see, oh, you expect me to template this, and then it's gonna go, there's no text in this. This is like a binary file, and it just blows up. Which is a blind check that probably should get fixed, but yeah.
And so I think I'd have to double check our the details of how we run these hooks, but right now it's sort of as assumed that you probably have bash or sh or some kind of Bourne shell. What I can't remember is if we're choosing the shell interpreter for you to run the program, or if we're running the program and then the shebang line dictates the interpreter. Originally, so our supervisor on the Linux side, it does have static busybox as a runtime dependency, so that we have things like ls and cat and sh. So not full born like bash, but enough. And what I can't remember though is like ideally we should know, oh, if it's like a Bourne shell kind of thing, then we'll run our busybox static Bourne shell, and you'll know you have that at runtime. That's what I would expect to happen. What might be happening is we might just be running that shell script and then using the shebang, and most people just put like /bin/sh. So
that is definitely what we're doing. I can definitely confirm that.
The bummer is, you know, the supervisor thinks it has what it needs. It might turn out that it doesn't have that in user land, and worse, you might have two separate like shell implementations doing that series of hooks, which is it's a bummer.
So, there's been another issue that got triage that's probably can be related back to this. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a comment, Fletcher, that on this one, that would be awesome. But effectively, like a really good example of what this kind of maybe bubbles up from our UX is that like Ubuntu users, anybody who's deploying Habitat packages on Ubuntu, if the shebang in their run hooks is /bin/bash or bin/sh. I mean, bin/sh on Ubuntu actually reverts to Debian bash.
Yeah, the dash.
And that has some slightly different syntax for things, which means that stuff can sometimes go totally wonky. So if we're saying don't, you know, we may need to have a couple of things here to resolve this, but if we were setting that interpolated value, or if we were setting that shebang value in advance of executing the script, then what we would end up with is requiring to use our busybox shell, which is fine, except for users that are on Linux and not using Docker are not necessarily going to have bash, the core bash installed or the core busybox installed, which means that we end up in a state where your packages could have more bloat to them than you would like at installation time.
Yeah,
it's I mean, it seems like a trivial problem, but it's a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you would just leave a comment, Fletcher, with some of your thoughts on it, and I'll come back through and leave my own as well. I think that would be good. So we did actually use the whole hour going through those issues. That's good because we had some great conversation. So depending on how many new issues we have, untriaged issues over the course of the next week, we may end up light next week as well. So my plan is if we end up with enough time at the end of next week, what we'll probably do is go and start through the process of triaging the core plans repo. And I'm kind of glad we didn't get to it this week for a couple of reasons, which is specifically I've got to clean up some stuff on that repo, like creating the milestones actually, and updating some of our labels, etc. So
that's a really good idea. Just get it in the same shape as this one.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm going to do that this week, and then we'll also be adhering to our new triage process next week when that time comes. So for now, that's going to be it for the week of August 22nd. And thank you, everybody who could join.